In the British general or parliamentary elections of July the 5th, 1945, one issue, of course, was whether the British people would reward their powerful wartime leader and Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, with another term, or whether they would, while personally respecting and admiring Prime Minister Churchill, give the Labour Party's leader Clement Attlee a chance to prove or disprove his capabilities as the country's Prime Minister. The British people had truly had to tighten their belts ever since the we could even say the 1920s, because for most of the 1920s, almost the entire decade, in fact, according to an economic and social history of Britain, the country's unemployment rate had been 10% or higher. And of course, during the Great Depression years, especially of the early 1930s, it had been considerably higher still, although Britain had been spared from the kind of mass unemployment, 25% or so, that the United States and especially Germany suffered from. And then hardly had they recovered well from the Great Depression, the Second World War had started in 1939. And while the war industries, of course, employed millions of working-age Britons, there were many shortages. Rationing had to be implemented in order to make the foodstuffs, especially the essential ones, like bread and milk, last for everyone. And then potatoes had to be consumed a great deal in order to substitute for some grains. And of course, the Battle of Britain in 1940 and in the early first half of 1941 had also done much to devastate the country's infrastructure, although those damages had been repaired. But anyway, the Labourites, especially such left-wing Labourites as Aneurin Bevan, had promised the ordinary Britons, especially the working-class Britons, much more material prosperity and income redistribution. Winston Churchill hurt his cause and the cause of the Conservative election campaign when, in his first election broadcast on the British Broadcasting Corporation's radio, he declared that the only way in which the Labour Party could implement its welfare state was to institute a kind of Gestapo. And Gestapo, of course, was the well-known German secret police, and a ruthless one at that. No doubt very humanely instituted in the first place, or at first. No wonder that most British voters therefore rejected Prime Minister Churchill's party while they still admired him, and allowed Clement Attlee to become the new Prime Minister. Reportedly, this quote is from one of Richard Nixon's letters. Mrs. Churchill tried to comfort her husband by saying that his election defeat would be a blessing in disguise, and the defeated Prime Minister had answered his wife, "If this is a blessing, it is certainly very well disguised," or something like that. One other story tells him of having told his valet or servant he had been taking a bath, "There may well be a landslide and they have a perfect right to kick us out. That is democracy. That is what we have been fighting for. Hand me my towel." He's also reported to have said that democracy is the worst form of government unless we consider the other forms of government that the people have tried from time to time. He also made fun of Clement Attlee, although privately he respected his Labour opponent by saying, "Mr. Attlee is a modest man, and he has plenty to be modest about." Attlee had reportedly said, this quote is from The Chronicle of the Second World War, a British publication from about 1991. That's a bit thick, Winston. Thick is a British English word for stupid or silly. When, in his opinion, Churchill had proposed policies that were not smart in the wartime government. Well, anyway, in some constituencies, the polls were delayed until July the 12th or July the 19th because of the local weeks. And of course, since millions of British soldiers were still serving overseas, or at least hundreds of thousands, their votes had to be transported, and therefore the votes were only declared on July the 26th during the Potsdam conference in Eastern Germany. The Labour Party, for the first, or possibly at least the last time, declared not only that it was a socialist party, but that it was proud of being a socialist party. This quotation comes from some collection of historical essays that I photocopied around the turn of the century, maybe in 2000 or 2001, at the University of Helsinki in southern Finland. Since then, the Labour Party, interestingly, has been toning down its socialism, except, of course, for the party's left-wing firebrands. The Labour Party received a massive victory, a landslide victory, getting 47.7% of the vote, or about 11,968,000 votes, and winning a massive 393 seats out of 640. Only Tony Blair's landslide victory in 1997, 419 seats out of 659 in terms of the majority earned, has been a more massive one. The Conservative Party only got 36.2% of the vote and 197 seats. The Liberal Party, led by Sir Archibald Sinclair, received only 9% of the vote and 12 seats. The Liberal National Party of Ernest Brown got 2.9% of the vote and 11 seats. So Britain for the first time received a left-wing majority government in its history, since the two Labour governments led by Ramsay MacDonald in the 1920s had been minority governments supported by the Liberals, and then Ramsay MacDonald had been the titular Prime Minister of what was mostly a Conservative national government for most of the years 1931 to 1935, when he was still Prime Minister.